Okay, it's time for the most common question of all. What kind of clay do you use? I use water-based clay mostly. It's a terracotta clay called Terra Rossa di Montelupo from Tuscany in Italy. It essentially means red earth or red dirt from Montelupo. Any smooth terracotta clay should do the trick, though you might need to try a few to find the one that you like. Terracotta clays are often going to be sourced locally, so there will be variety in quality. I also use oil-based clay for smaller pieces and would recommend those if you are starting out sculpting at home, for example, because they make much less of a mess and they're much easier to deal with health-wise than water-based clays. I use Chavant NSP Medium and Chavant Le Beau Touché mostly. And I have a lot more on this subject on my FAQ post on Patreon, which is free, and you can find a link to it in the description below the video. Another common question here, how do you keep the clay from cracking? When using water-based clay, I just spray it with water when it starts to feel too dry and wrap it up in plastic when the workday is over. There's a lot of feel involved here, so it's hard to give exact formulas, and obviously where you are in the world is going to matter too, temperature, humidity, etc. Usually spraying less than you would think is better than spraying too much, and most beginners will spray their work way too much and sort of make their sculptures into a muddy mess of clay. Spraying less is usually better. When wrapping up the work at the end of the day, don't be too precious about the work, but be really precious about the wrapping. Make sure the plastic is stuck to the surface of the clay in most places. That's gonna eliminate a lot of air, which would dry out the clay inside the bag, and seal the bag somehow to keep the air from getting in there and drying out the clay. Often I will push the bag into the clay where the clay meets the wooden base to seal the bag properly. So, really nothing magic is going on here, just spray your sculpture with water and cover the sculpture carefully with a plastic bag. Now, if you're working in oil-based clay, you don't really need to do anything. Oil-based clay doesn't really dry out, so you can just leave it out. I would maybe keep it away from too much sunlight and too much heat, and if you're in a place that's pretty dusty, dust will stick to oil-based clay, so then you can throw a bag over the top of it to keep the sculpture clean, but that's pretty much it. Back to something a bit more ethereal and hard to pinpoint. How to find your artistic voice. Now, we get this sort of question a lot from students at the academy as they're trying to figure out who they want to be in life, and I guess there are many ways to approach something like this. So this is just going to be my take on it, essentially. Whether or not that holds any water, I'll leave up to you. If you're watching this video, I will assume that you are interested in becoming some sort of representational artist, an artist that sculpts, draws, and paints stuff that looks like stuff, essentially. If that's the goal, then the first step on the journey to finding your artistic voice, I think, should be to learn how to represent the real world in a convincing manner, purely on a technical level. That's where getting some education is going to be really helpful to you, as without that, you're looking at a really long journey to understand natural phenomena. I think that 12 to 15 years of experience gained working for yourself can be shortcutted by attending the Florence Academy, for example. So you can essentially get 15 years of experience compressed into 3 years. I think this is a good trade. Working from life or from photo reference of real things are going to be essential, and if you can, working from life is really helpful. If our goal is to represent, then we should look to what we are attempting to represent, of course. That should be our inspiration. At the same time, we should gather influences. Influences are artists whose work we like and whose work we essentially want to emulate. You should do master copies of their work and try to broaden your influences over time. This tends to happen naturally, of course, as the further into your artistic journey you get, the more artists you are going to be exposed to. Set some boundaries during your studies and put your artistic goals into a little box and wait for your studies to be completed. Do not try to create a master copy, for example, that has too much of you in it. You probably don't even know what you are at that point. Try to create a master copy that is as true to the master you are copying as possible. Try to become them and see how they saw the world. That's how you'll learn the most from doing master copies. You can pick work that has things in it that you are interested in studying and emulating. If you want to study how someone dealt with line, for example, find works to copy that has a lot of lines present. Do not find a tonal painting, for example, and attempt to copy line. The same thing goes for your study from nature. Try to stay true to nature, or as true as you are capable of staying at any given time. This all certainly probably sounds rather dry to you, but frankly it's going to be the bedrock foundation of what will eventually become your artistic voice. So be very patient with yourself when it comes to your studies, and take them seriously and give them enough time. As a representational artist, your work can roughly be summarized as an amalgamation of nature and all of your artistic influences. I suggest always keeping nature close, as this will keep you from simply being a poor imitation of someone else. Now, most of us are going to start out like poor imitations of someone else because our interest in art usually doesn't stem from looking at nature, but it stems from looking at the work of another artist. This is where broadening the number of influences come into play, of course. If you have one influence, then you are much more likely to be an imitation of that influence. But if you have 20 or 30 influences mixed together, you're going to become something fairly unique rather quickly. While looking for what sort of art you are interested in making, it can be useful to create mood boards. All your influences on one board in one location so that you can see them all together. Ask yourself what it is about this particular artist that you like. Then ask the same thing about the next artist on the board. Find the red thread that runs through your influences, and you are likely going to begin to understand where you need to head and what sort of work you are interested in making. Now this should begin to help solve the problem, what will my work look like question. Your style, so to speak. This can of course evolve over time as well. In addition, we have to pick what to make art of. And this is the other half of the equation. Your style is not only how you make something or how you make something look, but it's also what you make work of, the subjects and concepts that you choose to portray. There are so many choices here, and to me it's important to note that none of them are invalid. Often I will hear artists discuss this, and often it turns into a validation of what they are making. For example, story is better told in other mediums, so you shouldn't make sculpture that deals with story. That's an argument that we hear a lot at the school. Movement is better portrayed in dance, for example, so don't make sculptures that are frozen in time as far as movement goes. Make sculptures that are still and in still poses, and so on and so forth the discussion will go. And I don't really agree with any of this, and while it's good to find out what you like, it doesn't mean that it needs to invalidate everybody else's choices. Art is a broad church, after all. I do find this question very hard to answer, since it's very easy to find things to make sculptures of, in my opinion. I prefer to look to stories that mean something to me on a deep level, perhaps something that is universally true of the human condition. And religion and myth will often have these aspects present, but these days popular media will have a lot of these same themes present, as they are also influenced by the same religion, myth, and philosophies that you might be influenced by. It's okay to make something because you think it's interesting, simply because you think it's interesting. Someone else is likely going to find the same thing very interesting. It's also completely fine to make something for the sake of making it. Portraits of someone who you just like the look of, that's a perfectly valid reason, and a figure of somebody you find beautiful, for example, or even if you don't find them beautiful and you just find them interesting, that's a valid reason as well. Try not to let the "what should I make work of" question get in the way of actually making the work. So if I don't know what to make, I'm gonna make a portrait, for example. At least then I'm practicing, I'm getting better, and I'm getting something out of it as well. Also do keep in mind that we are visual artists, and so describing why or what something is not really something that I think we should need to do. That's sort of more in the realm of concept art. We do our work visually because it's beyond words. Just make something that you find interesting. I simply try to make something that I think deserves to be made. And I think that's enough.